All right, just giving people a little bit time as they log in and settle in and go, oh my gosh, it's 7 o'clock, I have that thing to do. It's much easier to lose track of time when you're, in the same space most of the day.
I see a lot of familiar names.
All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Let me pull up my actual intro so I don't forget anything. We are celebrating our virtual panel, the Chapter Book Stage, Brief but Rewarding. My name is Stephanie Hines, and I'm the Children's Manager at Print to Bookstore in Portland, Maine. Before we jump into things, I have just a few couple housekeeping details. First of all, of course, all copies of our featured authors' books are available for sale at printbookstore.com. We're currently offering free curbside pickup for those local to Portland, as well as free shipping on all books or of orders over $20. I'm going to drop a link in the chat right now so you can check out those books. So there's that link. And second, if you're joining us from Zoom and you look to the bottom of your screen, you can see that there's a Q&A function following the panel. We're going to be opening it up to a audience Q&A, so feel free to submit all of your questions there at any point. And if you're joining us via the Facebook live stream, I'll be monitoring those comments there as well. Just a heads up, there's a little bit of a slight delay in the feed, but I will get to your questions, I promise. Now, it is my utmost pleasure to introduce our authors for this evening. Frazer Blakemore is an award-winning author for children and young adults. Megan's books have been honored with inclusion on state lists, such as the Junior Library Guild selections and as best books for Kirkus and Bank Street College. A former school librarian, Megan has taught writing to students in elementary through graduate school. She lives in Maine with her husband, children, 2 cats, a leopard gecko, and sometimes a hive of bees. Jennifer, a graduate of Lesley College and Harvard Graduate School of Education, is the author of many books for children and young adults, including the early reader series, Andy Shane and the very bossy Dolores Starbuckle, the best-selling middle grade novel, Small as an Elephant and Paper Things. Her newest books are The Dollar Kids, a picture book titled This Is My Room, No Tigers Allowed, and Twig and Turtle. Jennifer, a 3-time winner of the Lupine Award for Young Readers, lives in Maine with her husband and dog, and when not writing, provides trainings in writers' workshops for teachers. VT Bidania was born in Laos and grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. She is an MFA in creative writing from the New School and received a Mirrors and Windows Fellowship from the Loft Literary Center. She's the author of ASTRID and Apollo, a chapter book series starring Hmong American twins Astrid and Apollo Lee. Without further ado, I'll pass the proverbial mic over to our panelists. Thank you again for being with us this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thanks to Gracie as well, and all of the, everyone involved at Print Bookstore. If you do not know print and you're ever in Portland, Maine, you need to go. It is just an amazing bookstore. It's the dream of a bookstore. And if you're inspired to buy one of our books this evening, would you please buy it from Print? Because they've just been fabulous in arranging this evening tonight. And we really want to thank them in that way. So the way the evening's going to work is that we're each going to do a little reading, and then we're going to take turns asking questions of each other. Each of us will ask 1 or 2 questions, the others will answer, and then after we've done this little Q&A amongst ourselves, we invite you to ask the questions that you have, anything about chapter books or about the writing life. So Vong is going to begin first.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. So I'm going to be reading from my first book, Astrid and Apollo and the Starry Campout. And I'm actually reading chapter 2, an excerpt from chapter 2. So I'll just tell you a little bit about what's going to happen before I read. So in chapter 1, what's happening in the book is that Astrid and Apollo, who are twins, their family is going camping for the very first time. And Astrid is very nervous about going. She's afraid of bears and being attacked by mosquitoes, and also she doesn't like to be in the dark. The idea of sleeping outside in the dark really worries her. So she wants to bring her glow-in-the-dark wand with her, and her twin brother Apollo convinces her to go on the trip and tells her it's going to be a fun time and that maybe their mom might even get them some egg rolls to eat. So I will be reading a short excerpt from chapter 2, so that's just what happened. So here we go. Chapter 2, Amazing Egg Rolls. On the way to the campground, Astrid's family stopped for burgers and fries. Dad got the food at the drive-thru window. Mom passed it to Astrid and Apollo in the back seat. "Here's your lunch," she said. "Thanks," Astrid sighed, looking down at her burger. She had been hoping for egg rolls. "Mom, I wish we had egg rolls." "I'm sorry, I didn't have time to make them this morning," Mom said. "Packing for camping took a long time. I promised to make amazing egg rolls another time." Astrid took a bite of her burger. The campground was 3 hours away. Astrid sat back and fell asleep. When she woke up, Dad was driving into the state park. He checked them in at the office, then he bought a pack of wood. "For the campfire," he said. They drove on a windy road into the forest. "Look at all those trees," said Apollo. The trees were tall and pretty. The sun was shining down through the leaves. Astrid watched the forest carefully. She wondered, were bears hiding in there? Big, mean bears with sharp claws and sharp teeth? She hoped not. After a few minutes, Dad said, "There it is." He turned off the road and parked. Everyone got out of the car. Dad took the tent from the car. He spread it out on the grass. He handed a long, bendy pole to Astrid and Apollo. Dad showed them loops on the outside of the tent. "Now stick the pole into these loops," he said. Astrid and Apollo got more poles from the car. They put them through the tent loops. The poles lifted the tent up high. Soon the tent was standing up like a little house. Astrid looked up at the orange and purple sky. The sun was setting. She hurried to the car. She had to get her glow-in-the-dark wand, but when she opened the car door, the wand wasn't there. And that's the end of chapter 2.
I'm going to read next. We have some slides to actually show you, the print, what the interior of our chapter books look like, because looking at the inside of a chapter book really gives you an idea of the reading level and who the perfect reader might be for that book. But right now, the screen sharing is still disabled, so that will come. I see that Steph just added it. Let's see if I can add it for myself here, and then we'll go back to Vong's. So let's see here. Let's see if I can get out here. There we go. Am I sharing screen yet?
I don't see it yet.
You don't see my screen yet? Okay, hold on. Do you see my screen?
No.
Okay, so now I'm going to put up the PowerPoint. Okay, so here's Vong's. This is, can you see it now?
No. Do you want me to try?
Sure.
Can you see that?
I can see a black screen that says, oh, there it is. Yeah. Now I can see it.
It's loading now, but sorry, I shouldn't have made it big. There, can you all see it?
Yep.
Okay. So I can click through.
Okay.
So I just want to give everyone a chance to kind of look at it a second and the beautiful illustrations, which are amazing. All right, so this is you, right, Jennifer?
I'm still seeing Vong's.
Oh, sorry. That's me.
Oh, I think you don't have the one that's.
Or do I not have the most recent?
Yeah, I don't think so. Let me just read, and I will put them up after as you are reading.
Sorry.
That's okay. Let's see. Are you able to see me now?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see you.
Sorry, guys.
Minor technical difficulties.
We did try this. So I'm reading from the first book, Twig and Turtle, Big Move to a Tiny House. And I'm skipping ahead a little bit Twig and her family have just moved to Happy Trails, Colorado, and they've moved into a tiny house. And this is Twig's first day at school, and her teacher, Mr. Harbour, suggests that she introduce herself to her classmates. I don't have time to answer before Mr. Harbour calls us to the front of the room for morning meeting. He introduces me and asks me to tell a few things about myself. I tell them that we moved to Happy Trails 3 days ago, and we're living in a tiny house. Are you in that house on Main Street? Asks Angela. I've seen it, says a boy who rises up on his knees. You live between Kara's Carrots and Sudsy's Laundromat. Oh yeah, it's like a trailer, says another, on wheels. Or a cute little dollhouse, says Angela. The way she says it makes me feel like a cute little doll, and it has me wondering if she's my FBF, that's future best friend, after all. You live in that, says the boy with the braces. I want to explain. I want to tell them how my parents didn't want to work at their big computer jobs anymore, but they wanted to live simply so they'd have more time to spend on their comics and photography. I want to tell them how we're saving money and saving the earth at the same time. But Mr. Harbour says something like, a home is a home is a home, folks, which makes me think that he thinks my feelings are getting hurt. He changes the subject by starting the writing mini lesson on details that convince. Then he sends us off to write. Remember, Mr. Harbour says, we're writing opinions. Do you know what an opinion is, Twig? He asks as he hands me a notebook that looks like everyone else's. I nod. You write what you think about something and then back it up with reasons. Precisely, he says. I had writer's workshop in 2nd grade, so I know what to do. I open to a fresh sheet of paper, put the date at the top, and think of a topic to write about. The first thing that comes to mind, surprisingly, is not my unusual house, but Bo. I have an opinion about Bo. He is the most fascinating dog in the whole world. I start to list convincing details I could include. When Bo stands on his hind legs, he's as tall as my dad. When he wants a drink, he goes to the kitchen sink and waits for one of us to turn on the water. He's afraid of the robot vacuum. Even though he's a Great Dane, he loves to sit on my lap. And just like that, my stupid eyes tear up again, like there are just too many feelings inside me today, and some need to spill out.
Great. All right, so I'm going to be the third reader, and I'm going to read from my third Frankie Sparks book, which is Frankie Sparks and the Big Sled Challenge. I was the librarian at Dyer Elementary School in South Portland, very close to Print, and we did a cardboard challenge where you build something out of cardboard. And so this book is actually dedicated to my friend Margaret Berman, the art teacher there. And when I was working on it, I called it Frankie Sparks and the Cardboard Catastrophe, because as much as I loved what the kids made in the end, the whole process of building things out of cardboard is a bit of a fiasco. So I'm going to read the first chapter or part of the first chapter of this book. Whoosh! The wind whipped past Frankie's face. She held on tightly to the handles of her red saucer sled as she flew down the snowy hill. Bump, bump, bump. She went over a patch of chunky snow that rattled her teeth and shook her brains inside her head. Her big challenge was coming up quickly. Everyone called it Extreme Maximus. Once a 5th grader had gone off it, flown 3 feet in the air, and done a flip. At least, that's what people said. Most of the 3rd graders were too scared to try Extreme Maximus. They stayed in the center of the hill, but not Frankie. She was built for speed. She thrived on action. She was going to conquer Extreme Maximus. This was her 3rd time trying. The first 2 times, she'd gotten scared and bailed out at the last minute. Not this time. She squeezed the handles even more tightly. "Go, Frankie," her best friend Maya yelled from the bottom of the hill. Now Frankie definitely couldn't chicken out, not with people watching. Let's show you the picture. The illustrations are by Nadia Serrell. She was practically on top of the jump. She closed her eyes as tightly as she could. Up, up, up she flew, and then crash. Her saucer landed hard and started spinning around and around. She opened her eyes to a whirl of white snow, green trees, and blue sky. She coasted along a bit longer and then thumped up against the bench that was near the bottom of the hill. "Oof," she exclaimed. She was pretty sure she'd left her stomach somewhere behind her. She rolled off the sled and onto the snow. She felt like she was spinning. Maya ran up to her. "Frankie, are you okay?" Frankie popped up. "Okay, I am awesome. I conquered Extreme Maximus." Luke, who was in their class, came running over. "That was epic, Frankie." Stop there.
Are you seeing your page now, Meg?
No.
No.
I think we don't need to.
I guess not. I guess we just let it go.
All right, so should I go ahead and start with, oh, wait, hold on. Now I see it.
All right. Okay.
There it
So
is.
there's Meg's. Let's go back one. It's not going to let me. This is funny. There we go. So there's, let me move this out. That's Meg's. Oh, I want to go the other direction. There we go. So this is Twig and Turtle. This is what the illustrations in Twig and Turtle look like, and the text. And now we're back. I'm going to start right here at the beginning. This is Vance. So this, she's got these great color illustrations that are just so
They're
enviable.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. And I want to say that my illustrations are done. The illustrator is Paula Franco, who I love her work, and she's really made this world come alive. I just couldn't be more pleased with the ways in which she knows Happy Trails and the characters. And then there's Frankie Sparks again.
And I should add that my illustrator is Dara Lasheli. She's a debut illustrator too. She's Hmong American and also from Minnesota.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she has like sort of an anime style in her work. So that showed through in the illustrations too. And it was really fun to see that.
Yeah.
Sure does. Okay. There, that part of it is over for a bit.
Okay. So I'm going to start with it's sort of a two-part question. So a study of adult readers found that many were readers of series, including chapter books, when they were kids. This makes sense to me because chapter books and series offer familiar characters and plots, which can help readers gain confidence. They help newly independent readers understand how books work, and those readers start to see themselves as expert readers. So my question's for you. Were you chapter book series readers as kids, and if so, which ones? And then do you get that sort of similar satisfaction out of writing those books as a reader might get?
Do you want to go, Jen? Yes, I can. So I read all kinds of books as a kid. So I don't necessarily know if the books that I read were chapter books. The only ones that I'm thinking about that could have qualified as chapter books are maybe the Betsy Tacy series and the Boxcar Children. Maybe those were chapter book series. And then of course, you know, like Beezus and Ramona and Super Fudge, those were sort of series in that they kind of continued on. But as a kid, I read those. But now as an adult, I read so many more. the chapter book series and all kinds of book series, I read so many. I mean, there's just too many to list. I'll just throw a few out there, like the Princess in Black series, the Mindy Kim series, Layla and the Bots, which is new, The Amazing Life of Azalea Lane. There's so many, of course, The Magic Tree House and Piggy and Elephant, you know, those, there's just tons of series that I really am really into right now and that I read all the time. Probably the entire collection of the Scholastic Acorn and Branches series. I've read all of those. Those are so fun. But your question about what's satisfying about writing a series, I guess it's similar to what's satisfying for me as a reader. I do like continuing on these adventures characters that I'm familiar with and worlds that I'm familiar with. So as a reader, that's what I like about series. And I think that for when I'm writing a series, I'm thinking about my target reader and how they're most likely going to be, I mean, I want to introduce them to a character in a world that hopefully they're going to love and want to continue reading and become more confident as they read, like what you mentioned, Meg. And then I also think of it as, especially for the really young readers, if they really like a certain character and their world, then it's sort of like a familiar friend. You know, they want to, with your friends, you kind of want to know what's going to happen in their lives and what's their next adventure. So I think of my reader, if they really like my characters, then that's like their friend, and they want to know what happens in the next book and the book after that. They want to see the kind of experiences they have and how they respond to those. There's this familiarity, this connection that they may already have. And also, especially for me, because my books are pretty short, they're 5 chapters, but around 3,500 words. I think the advantage of series is that once a reader is done with, even if they finish, let's say 4 books in the series, it would be easy for them to go back and read them again, you know, because they're shorter, as opposed to like some adult series like Game of Thrones or something like that, where once you're done reading that, you know, it's like, it's hard to go back. But I think with chapter book series for kids who really are into a particular world, they could read it over and over again. And when they're done with that one, they're done with the whole series, they may want to go back again. So that's what's most satisfying for me, knowing that I can create this world that readers will continue to go on, and giving them like a familiar friend.
I grew up in Peterborough, New Hampshire, which has claim to the first public free library in the country. And the library was in a very old, one of these, I think it was a Carnegie building. And I can remember going into that library and going directly to the Mother West Wind series. And part of it was it was my place. I knew where I could go in the library. I knew where the books the world that I was familiar with was contained. I, of course, like many kids who read in a series, I was going to read every single book in that series. And I was the kind of kid that wanted to read them in order. So I was really bummed if one of the books was out. So yeah, I was. And of course, like Yvonne, Beezus and Ramona, Henry Huggins, like that probably was the next series that grabbed me. What I love as an adult writing chapter books is that, before I go into this, I wanted to say something else. What was really fun was being a parent of chapter book readers. And my daughter is now in her early 30s, but throughout her life, when she needed comfort food, she was not the kid that reached for the donuts. She went back and reread her chapter books. And one of her favorites was Best Enemies by Catherine Laverick. And you know, I could tell when she was bummed out, she was back reading Best Enemies. She could be 16. But those books, I think, remain so much a part of our development, so much a part of who we become and how we think about the world, that they hold, even though that the chapter book stage is very brief, I think it holds a really special place in our hearts. And as an adult, writing chapter books, when I write middle grade novels, I have to create a whole world, and as you do with chapter books, and I need to bring in characters that you know very well, as I do with chapter books. But my middle grade novels tend to focus on 1 or 2 major themes. And I try to have all of the events, all of the happenings in the book sound the bell of those themes. With chapter books, what's so much fun is that each book can have a different theme. So I know the world and I know the characters, but I can keep adding new episodes. I can keep adding to the lives of Twig and Turtle. So in the first book, in Twig and Turtle, Big Move to a Tiny House, the theme, of course, is transition and how we move through change. And in book 2, I'm dealing with gender issues and gender labeling. There's a toy store and there's pink packaging and blue packaging. And, you know, I sort of head into that issue head on. And then in the third book, I deal with a balance of privacy and community. When do we want to be alone? And when is it okay to be alone? And when do we want to be with community? And then in the fourth book, I'm dealing with finding your truth and speaking your truth, finding your voice. And it's so much fun because there's no end to the themes that I can keep exploring with a series like this.
That's great. Thank you.
Meg, did you we need to hear from you on that?
Oh,
question.
okay. So, and I also was a big Beverly Cleary, Ramona reader as well. I was also a huge Babysitter's Club fan. So I read all of those books. Again, I would try to read them in order and then read the like those super ones that had like all 4 girls in one. And for me, I really like what Vong said about the familiar friend. I feel the same way, that you're sort of creating this friend in the book that the kids can go back to again and again. And I think something that sort of ties all of our books together, along with Beverly Cleary's books, is that these are regular kids doing kind of regular things. And I think it's also, you know, a chance for kids to see that their lives are worth having a story about. And that's very satisfying to me as well.
So agree.
Great. I have a couple questions. So I wanted to talk about research. What kind of research did you do for your series, if any? You know, was it extensive? And as you were, you know, plotting and outlining the kind of research that you did, I was curious about that. And also, I really like putting humor in my books. So I was wondering if you intentionally put humor in your books. How did you go about including it, you know, in your stories? So research and humor.
Okay, so these are all STEM design thinking books. So every book has a problem that Frankie solves by inventing something, and then she also has sort of a parallel friendship problem that she has to solve. So my research would be sort of figuring out what her problem was and how to work on that. So the first one is Frankie Sparks and the class pet, and they're getting a class pet, and it has some parameters. I try to get some science words in there. And it needs to be an animal that can fit in an aquarium, costs less than $50, is easily transportable, and doesn't need to be fed every day. And this was actually based on a project that one of the teachers in the school where I worked had done. And as Steph mentioned, I have a leopard gecko. We have a leopard gecko in our house, and that's what I thought it was going to be. But as I know, they don't need to be fed every day. So I had to figure out what animals did need to be fed every day so that she could make up a solution. And sort of interestingly, that's where some of the humor comes from. Like, I like to play with words, and I think words that are fun to say and a little tricky. So in the book, she talks about a capybara, and then there's this great illustration of a capybara, which I just think is a funny animal and a fun word. And so that's typically how I'm trying to infuse some humor, some funny situations that the kids will relate to, but again, find a little funny. And I agree that I think humor is so important in these books, because you want the kids to be having fun and seeing and reading as an enjoyable experience. The other type of research I did is that I make every invention that Frankie makes. Either I make it or my kids make it. So that is sort of hands-on research. And I think it's also important to know that sometimes, we're researching in books or online, but sometimes research is observing and doing things as well.
I had the best research because, first of all, I had to research tiny houses. That means that I had to watch a lot of HGTV. And I had to look at lots of tiny house designs. I mean, this is, if you know my work, you know that homes are in all of my work, and this is just a passion of mine. So that was so much fun, sort of trying to figure out the floor plan of this house. And although it's also been a really big struggle, because trying to communicate what's in my head into Paula's head to draw the interior of a tiny house has been interesting. But I find that I research no matter what I write. You know, she, as you heard from the reading, her tiny house is between Kara's food truck, which only serves foods made with carrots. So I had to research all kinds of recipes, all kinds of foods that you can make. You know, I learned that there's things called, there are carrot hot dogs that supposedly they're carrots that taste just like hot dogs. I have not yet made those. Or, you know, the laundromats on the other side. And I need to know, well, it's been a while since I've been to a laundromat. Do people use their credit cards now? Do they use a special card for the machines? So I feel like no matter what I'm writing, I'm doing research simultaneously. Great Danes. Bo is a Great Dane. He becomes, oh, I shouldn't give it away. Never mind. I won't go on. I'll talk about humor instead. So I have never thought of myself as funny. And I'm not. I'm not even being modest. I'm a pretty serious person for the most part. And, you know, in my house growing up, I had two brothers, and they were funny. I learned to tell stories because they got the jokes. They were quick. They had the puns. They knew how to turn something around. They were always getting the laughs. But what I discovered is that if I just go into the story and create characters who have a sense of humor, then humor bubbles up. So on the first day of school, for example, Turtle teaches her friends a game called Follow My Directions. And that was sort of something that just bubbled up because of who Turtle is. And I laugh out loud when those things happen, and they always surprise me. But you know, if you said to me, write a funny book, I would just feel stricken with fear.
That's funny. Okay.
How about you, Vong?
Yeah, well, for me, for research, well, almost all of the books are based on, you know, actual real life experiences of either me or my family. So I didn't have to do that much research in that way, but there are certain details in the books that I did have to find out a little bit more on. In the first book, I don't want to give away too much, but they go to a particular camp that has a certain animal, and I had to look that up and make sure that that was accurate. In the second book, the fishing book, where they go fishing, they learn how to fish from their dad and their uncle. And so I'm not a fishing expert by any means. So I did have to talk to, you know, people I know who are really good at fishing, and I had to make sure that I was describing how to put the bait on the hook and the rod and how to cast and all of that correctly and in a way that would make sense. I also had to research the kinds of fish that, because these books take place in Minnesota, so I had to research the kind of fish that they would most likely find in a lake here. You know, so those little details, but talking to people, interviewing people who I know who are experts in these you know, subjects, and then just looking online and, you know, making sure that I had the right information. That's how I did my research for my book. So it wasn't a ton, but it was a little bit, just to make sure that everything I was including was accurate. As far as humor, these characters are based on a combination of kids that I know, whether it's my own kids or students that I worked with when I worked in the schools, my nieces and nephews, just people I know, kids that I know, and kids are really funny. They're just funny naturally. So I didn't have to think too much about how to make the stories funny. It was more like I focused on the character development and what kind of reactions or responses that these particular characters would have, especially Apollo, the boy character. He's really funny. He has a really good sense of humor. So I would think, how would he respond to this situation? And I focused on the dialogue. Like, what kinds of things would he say? And also, what kind of faces would they make? So that's how I incorporated humor into the books, my books.
And I think we're all very lucky because we have illustrators. All of these books have spotted illustration throughout the books. So the illustrator can pick up on a lot of those funny moments too and show it in the expressions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So my questions, this is the teacher in me coming out. So chapter books have this really special role. They're not only introducing kids to wonderful stories and helping them develop a love of reading, but we're creating a bridge. They're books where kids are actually learning to read. And so what I'm wondering is, did you think about that as you were writing, and what kind of supports were you trying to put in your work? And secondly, I know we have a lot of writers who are here tonight. And so this second question is one that I imagine they might be wondering. And that is, there are a lot of chapter books on the market, you know, and they stay around. The Magic Treehouse books, that series, has been around for a while now. They fill the shelves. So do your books have a particular hook that you think helped them to make it to publication? So 2 long questions, supports and hook.
Do you want to go first?
Oh, okay. I can go. So as far as making sure that I have support for transitional readers with my books, ASTRID and Apollo is my debut. So it's my first time writing a chapter book series. And in the beginning, I did have to really be conscious of the length of the sentences and the lengths of the paragraphs, because this is a beginning reader. So I couldn't have sentences that were too long and detailed. I couldn't have paragraphs that were too long because we didn't want to overwhelm the readers. So I had to make sure that my word choices were good, you know, that I was still able to describe an action or a scene or an emotion, you know, in as few words as possible, but still make it clear and still make it good. That was something that I had to get used to as I was writing these books. I had to learn how to shorten them, but still make them really strong. Now I'm used to it. I've written a lot now, so now I'm good with that. But other supports we had, a lot of we have a lot of white space. It's a big font. There's the art, but we don't have art on every page. It's just a few pages. So big font, white space, and we also have really good front matter and back matter. So for my books, in the beginning of the book, I have, because my characters are Hmong American, I had some terms at the beginning of the book, Hmong terms that kind of describe and explain some Hmong words that I might be using throughout the story. For the back matter, I have some facts about Hmong for readers who might not be familiar with the history of the Hmong, or some facts about the Hmong. I include that. And then I always include, in every book, I always include a ton of food. So I have a whole list of Hmong foods and pictures and descriptions of what they are. And then there's the glossary, you know, for the readers who are just, you know, working on the vocabulary and something that they can refer to, the glossary. But we also, and I didn't have space to show it's here, but we also have a discussion section for readers, young readers to work with, you know, if they're reading the books with a parent or with a teacher, then there are discussion questions that ask them, you know, more for like reading comprehension and social emotional learning. There's a social emotional aspect to all of the books. And so then there are questions that ask them, you know, things like, in the case of the first book, The Starry Campout, Astrid was really anxious about going camping. So we have questions like, have you ever been anxious about going camping? You know, things like that, to get the kids to think more on a higher level, and also to be able to talk about that. So that was how I built in those supports in my series. And did I answer your the other question? What was the hook for my series? Well, I think I had a couple of hooks. For me, that maybe the bigger one was that my characters are Hmong American, and before my books, there were no chapter books that included Hmong American characters, and especially didn't have them as main characters. So I live in Minnesota, and Minnesota has a very large Hmong community, one of the largest in the state. So I wanted my characters to be Hmong American and also to live in Minnesota. And so my first hook was that they were Hmong American characters, and that's a much needed representation in kids' literature and in chapter books. My second hook, I think, was that they live in Minnesota, and I wanted them to be doing these outdoor things that Minnesotans do. You know, Minnesota is known for being very cold, which it is. The winters are 50 below, and there are blizzards all the time, and it's freezing here. But in the springs and summers, it's warm, and it's really, really beautiful. There's a ton of parks and lakes, and I mean, almost everyone here has a cabin. You know, people go to their cabins, they go on the lake, they go on their boats, they go fishing, and they camp, and they hike. And so I wanted to make sure that my two characters who live in Minnesota would be seen doing these kinds of popular activities. So I think those are my two hooks, that they were Hmong American, but also that they would be doing outdoor activities activities that are really popular, so that local readers who would read it would maybe able to relate to and be like, oh yeah, I've gone camping, or that's what it was like when I went fishing. Or for the kids who haven't done those things, or who live in states or cities where that's not as popular, they might get to see what that's like. Oh, so that's what the experience of going on a boat is like, you know. So those are kind of my two books, the you know, Minnesota thing, and the fact that they're home American.
And Maine is very similar, so I think you're going to find a lot of readers here as well who relate to what the kids are doing. Okay, so really similar for me. The sentence length was something that I really paid attention to. If you read my middle grade or young adult, I tend to write with pretty long sentences and a lot of sort of embedded clauses. And I knew that I just needed to be much more direct and straightforward. And that sort of changed the rhythm in a way that fits Frankie's personality. She's got a lot of energy and she's sort of go, go, go. And so having these short sentences really mirror her personality. And I think also that's where some of the humor comes from. As I mentioned, these are STEM related books. So if there was a word that I wanted to use, I made sure it was defined really clearly in the context. So I think one thing new readers are learning is how to define a word using context clues. But for the words like parameter and some other design related words where it was very important that they knew what it meant, I made sure that either, you know, this, like, you know, the narration says it or a character says it, so that kids can get the words and get the vocabulary that they need. I do think mine, like if we're thinking about sort of the span of chapter books, these are sort of on the upper end. They are 10 chapters and about 10,000 words. So, you know, almost 3 times as long as Vong's. So you can see how kids would be moving up. So thinking about that a little bit as well, what reading experiences they might have had and what reading experiences are still to come. The hook is definitely the STEM and design thinking aspect. Each book has the illustrator did this really great drawing of the design process that I love. And so every book at the end has the design process, and then a your turn to be the inventor, and it sort of walks the kids through what they would need to do to identify and solve the problem that Frankie has. And that was sort of how I pitched it. I worked with my agent, but since I have a background doing STEM and design education, I made like a whole proposal with, you know, what the possible stories can be, what the different problems were going to be, what STEM skills the kids would learn through the book. So I think especially where that's so, you know, important and in schools right now, that helped to sell this, helped to sell the series.
So I've already kind of mentioned one of my hooks was the tiny house. And I think it acted as a hook because it was a setting that was not only interesting, we all sort of love looking at miniature places, but that it also automatically creates a lot of conflict. You know, in a family living in a small house with a part-time dog, there is, you know, the space problems around storage. The kids can only have 3 t-shirts and 3 pairs of pants. That's it. There's a problem around toys. You know, there's a rule that if any new toy comes in, an old toy has to go out. Well, what happens if someone gives you a gift? There's problems around privacy. There's problems around conflicting interests. So as a setting, it just gives me so many things so much that I can work with. The other, like Vong's books, and I think Frankie has this as well, Frankie Sparks, there's a social emotional learning component. And so the books are dealing with, they're dealing with things, as I mentioned before, like friendships and how to navigate friendships. The TWIG is invited to join a social skills club when she first comes to school. She's having difficulty making friends. And so she belongs to this little club that where she's getting the support she needs to make the connections that she needs. And I think that perhaps was a hook too. In terms of supports, there are a number, and the same that Vung and Meg mentioned. My books too are closer to the reading level of Meg's. They're 10 chapters, 10 chapters. I did this the other day too. 10,000 words. 10,000 words. 10,000 words. 10 chapters. 1,000 words per chapter. You'd think I would know by now. But some of the added supports, when TWIG is working through some complicated thoughts, I have an illustration that sort of shows two of these things. We have bullet points. These are when she's, where in a middle grade novel, I would develop a scene and a scene and a scene, and you would begin to grow in your understanding of something. With TWIG, I'm more apt to list. I'm more apt to do bullet points. So there's a lot of white space, bullet points. And then this is a technique that we signal flashbacks for readers, because transitional readers often have difficulty knowing when they're in the present tense and when they're reading something from the past. So the illustrations have these sort of, Paula put these viney, sort of hazy global illustrations around things that happened in the past. And that's another support that the books have. But like you, I'm mainly watching my sentence structure, and I'm trying to keep things from getting too complex, often having to do that in revision as well. I get it on the page, and then when I go back, I try to simplify. So those are our questions, and I think Steph is going to pop back in.
Hello, that was lovely. Thank you all so much for sharing, and it's always great to hear people ask questions and then actually answer their own questions as well, because I feel like it gives some good insight as to like why they wanted to ask that question to begin with. So we do have a number of audience questions. Going to try and get through all of them. The first one we had actually emailed to us from Gail Donovan, another great local author here in Maine. And Gail was wondering if you know in advance how many books you want to have in a series, and if so, how do you decide?
I didn't really have a set plan. My proposal was for 4, but that it was sort of arbitrary.
Yeah, I think for me, when I pitched the idea, I also didn't know how many would be in a series, but I had a list of like, I think 7 ideas for the next books, and then when they gave me the book deal, they wanted it to be a series, and they said we have 4 books in the series. So they picked they had already picked 1, so they picked 3 more for my list. So yeah, I didn't know enough about this particular type of book, but I just had ideas ready. So in the end, I had 4.
And I am publishing with Pixel and Ink, which is a sister imprint to Holiday House. It's part of the same house. And Pixel and Ink is a new imprint, and they sort of have a dual mission. One is to publish series, and the other is to hopefully get them in film or TV streaming. So they're very media focused, and I knew that going in. So my initial contract was for 4, and then I know I have 2 more to write. That's been agreed upon, but it's sort of this idea that it's a little bit, let's see what happens. And it's with this dual goal of publishing a series, but in addition, hopefully doing something with media as well.
Well, that'll be exciting.
It is.
We also have a question from Mary Hunter. This question is for VT. I noticed that in your books, and they mentioned that they have the whole series, very excited, that you do such a wonderful job at blending Hmong and US cultures. For example, burgers and fries and egg rolls. Do you actively pick out differing cultural norms, or do they just come to you from your own experiences?
Yeah, I think they probably just come to me naturally. I don't intentionally plan to include like so much this and so much that. I just think of what might be typical for a home person. ASTRID and Nepal are second generation, so they were born here, but so they're pretty American, but they're also home. So I think about, for myself, what would I be doing? And for me, I speak 2 languages, so I would in my daily life I speak both languages here and there, and I eat all kinds of food, so I guess I think of it that way. When I was planning the books, I didn't intentionally want to insert different details, cultural details. It's just kind of happened naturally, and I just imagine, what would their life be like? What would a day be like? Where, if they were going somewhere, what would they eat? That's kind of how it happened. It's just kind of happened. I tried to make it as organic as possible.
Yeah, it makes it a really authentic experience, and I'm sure it helps a lot of people see themselves when you're just speaking from your own experiences. So we have a question from Jack Blakemore. Familiar last name, I wonder why. And Jack is wondering, what made you want to write books? So that's to everyone.
Want to answer, Meg?
Well, okay, so that's myself. So it's funny because Jennifer's books mentioned writing workshop, and I went to a K through 12 school district that was like all in on writing workshop. And so we wrote every day. And so it was just something that I'd always loved and always wanted to do. I think it was 6th grade when I decided, yes, this is what my career is going to be, and sort of pursued it from there. But I definitely credit my teachers from kindergarten all the way up through high school for supporting and making me into the writer that I am.
As a kid, I loved pretend play. Like, I didn't give up pretend play until, I was still doing pretend play in secret long after other kids had given it up. And for me, writing is the closest to that experience. And if you think about it, pretend play is all creating a story. You are, you're pretending to be a character, or your stuffed animals are a character, and you give them problems and you solve their problems. And if you know my middle grade novel, Paper Things, you know that Ari played this game, Paper Things, that I played. So for me, the writing of stories was just a natural extension of that, creating other worlds, putting problems in motion. I really think that I just never wanted to give that up.
That's nice. For me, I guess writing, I just loved reading so much as a kid. I read all the time. I read all kinds of books. I spent most of my entire childhood just reading. And so I really enjoy that. And when I was little, I thought I was going to grow up to be a scientist. It wasn't until I went to high school and started taking those biology and chemistry classes that I was like, okay, maybe I can't do this. But writing just always came naturally for me. And I didn't think of it as a career, even though I loved reading so much. But because I love reading so much, I'm always thinking of stories and ideas for stories. And I love watching movies and TV shows and just like thinking about, just different plots and characters and things like that. So then that's how it happened. That's how I ended up writing books, because I love reading so much and I love stories.
We also have a question from Matilda Blakemore, asking, why do you like writing? And I feel like you touched on that some in those answers. So if you feel like you've answered that thoroughly, that's fine. But I wasn't sure if anyone else had any additional reasons about like why they like writing in particular as a form of storytelling and creativity.
I can add to that. I think that writing gives you an added way to learn what you're thinking. That didn't make any sense at all. But it's through writing that I actually clarify my thoughts about a lot of things. It's a way that I solve problems in the world. If I'm having a problem, if I'm having trouble speaking up, poor Twig, so does she.
I agree. And I also think that idea of play is really important. So like when I'm writing a rough draft, that is the sort of like make-believe play time. And then revision is like a different type of play. It's almost like a puzzle type of play. So for me, that's why I get pleasure from writing.
I guess I could add that for me, writing, I like writing because I was, as a kid, and I guess maybe even as an adult, I'm actually a really shy person, and I'm pretty quiet. Well, my friends might not say I'm quiet, but it was always really hard for me to speak up in school. I was just so incredibly shy. But it was really easy for me to write. So I could write letters, I could write emails, I could write long things. Like written communication just comes much more easily for me than speaking. So that's another reason why I like writing as well. I mean, now I have to talk more, but yeah, so I use it as a form of communication too, in addition to telling stories. That's one of the reasons why I like writing as well.
There's a question from an anonymous attendee, which I wonder was maybe inspired by VT's book, asking, where did you go camping? So I don't know if anyone has any particular spots that they really enjoy, maybe a space that gives them inspiration.
I can say for the Starry Camp Out book, where they, the campground that they went in here, I don't mention it by name specifically in the book, but it was based on a camping trip that my family had, and that was in Forestville. So Minnesota has a lot of is it called state parks? A lot of parks where people go camping, and we chose the ones in the southern part of the state, and one of them is Forestville because it doesn't have a lot of mosquitoes. So that's my favorite place to go. But yeah, what about you, Megan, Jen? Are there places you like to go?
I like Rangeley State Park here in Maine, and we just went to Mount Blue State Park this summer, and I thought that was great. Great. Maine state parks are wonderful.
Yeah. I'm at that lucky stage where we're meeting our adult children to go camping, and the last place that we went camping was Escalante in Utah to climb through the canyons. Mm-hmm. So we have like many Minnesotans, we have a camp here in Maine. So when we're in Maine, we tend to go to our camp, which was on Lake Ambejijis at the base of Katahdin. But when I go camping, it's usually somewhere else.
Those all sound lovely, and I imagine the trees, especially right now, are beautiful in all of those spots. And I think our last question for the evening is from Kirby Larson. And Kirby was wondering, what surprised you most about writing these books?
I can go. I think that I thought that I would not be as engaged in the emotional problems of the kids in a chapter book. I thought that somehow I would have distance. You know, I'd be watching Twig and Turtle, and I would be amused by them, and I'd be amused by their antics. But I am as thoroughly engaged with the problems that these two girls have, as engaged with their problems as I was when I was writing young adult novels. You know, it isn't any different for me. I'm in the body of Twig. I'm as equally worried or happy or whatever the emotion is, despite the fact that they're chapter books.
You want to go, Meg?
Yeah, I think for me, I don't know if it was surprising, but it was just how much fun they are to write. When I started writing them, I'd come off writing some pretty dark young adult and middle grade, and just having this breath of fresh air in the form of Frankie and her friends was really nice.
I mean, I guess for me, I'm still kind of, this has been surreal for me. I never thought that I would debut during a pandemic. So I'm still, that's what surprised me. Like, okay, my books are, I'm published and now it's during a pandemic. So it's been, I guess maybe not your typical publishing experience, which I wouldn't know because this is my debut, but it's the whole experience, the entire experience has been surreal for me. So that's kind of what surprised me, the feelings that I have now that my books are out there and people are reading them, and I know kids are buying them, and I've heard from, you know, librarians and teachers, and everybody's very excited. But for me, I'm still like, did I really write a book out? You know, just because I've wanted to publish books for so long. And I mean, joking aside, I also the representation, you know, for the longest time I just wanted to have Hmong children represented in children's books, and so it took me a while to get here, and so now they're out there. So I'm surprised that it's happening just because the experience has been unusual because of our circumstances of how we're living nowadays. You know, we're having this event virtually, you know, so everything has just been kind of different, and that's what surprised me. Of all things, it surprised me that my book.
I know we might have had a technical hiccup. But I actually did want to squeeze in one more question, and so hopefully VT will be able to rejoin us and finish out thoughts, if that's okay with both of you, just because it connected with what she was saying, and I also think it's a lovely question that came in. Coming from Judith Kurtz. In all of your books, you represented minority groups via race, heritage, socioeconomics, etc. I appreciate this very much and wonder if this is naturally who you are as a writer, or if you feel a particular responsibility to represent diversity in literature for this age.
I can talk about that. I was just looking for something. So Judith Kurtz, speaking of dedications, Frankie Sparks of the Lucky Charm is dedicated to Judith. She's a former coworker of mine. And I will say, I sort of wrote Frankie as an every girl. I wanted all these girls that I knew from working in the school who saw themselves as makers and inventors. I wanted that representation. The illustrator, Nadia Serrell, drew her as an African-American child, which I thought was fantastic. And so that in turn made me think a lot about, because obviously I'm white, what my responsibility as an author going forward would be in terms of trying to make sure that I was doing as much to represent her culture as authentically as possible. And that's been, you know, one of the challenges of writing this series, but something that I think is really important for all of us to think about.
My other job when I'm not writing is that I have been traveling around the country giving workshops on Writer's Workshop. Basically, I train teachers to use the model Writer's Workshop in the classroom. And to do that, I go into classrooms all around the country and I work with kids. And in Maine, we're beginning to have classes that are more and more diverse, and it's wonderful to see. But the classrooms that I visit, you know, in Omaha, Nebraska, those classrooms are incredibly diverse. There are kids from 40 that speak 40 different languages. And so I wanted the book to reflect the classrooms that I see. And in doing that, it's lucky because then everybody does see themselves in the book.
Sorry, I cut out. I didn't know. I was talking. I was like, why are they frozen? Well, seeing your question.
So for the audience, I just messaged it, so she's reading it over.
Do you mind just reading it? Just saying.
Yeah, no, that's short. Yeah. So it was from Judith Kurtz. In all of your books, you've represented minority groups via race, heritage, socioeconomics, etc. I appreciate this very much and wonder if this is naturally who you are as a writer, or if you feel a particular responsibility to represent diversity in literature for this age.
Well, I'll try to shorten my answer. This is kind of like one of the reasons why I write as well. I'm Hmong. I was born in Laos, but I grew up in the U.S. as a Hmong refugee. And as I mentioned before, I always loved reading books, and I read so many books. And as a kid, my world was books, but I never saw anybody who looked like me in any of the books. And so that was just something that, really affected me deeply as a kid. And I always felt sad about it, but I couldn't even imagine seeing a book with somebody like me, just because I never saw that. I never saw that kind of representation. So I didn't think it was a possibility that would happen. It wasn't until I got older and, realized that, maybe I can do something about it. And my publishing journey it's been a very long one. I'll try to shorten this answer. I got my MFA in creative writing many, many years ago. I won't even tell you how long it's been. It's been a really long time. And I didn't submit my work for a long time, because in the beginning, when I first graduated, and was submitting my work, I always got the same response, which is that there's no place for books about Hmong people in the market, and nobody would ever read their books. So that was really discouraging for me, and it made me, it was a constant message that I received. So because of that, I just stopped submitting for a long time. And only recently, when I saw that more diverse books were being published, that I started submitting again. And that's how ASTRID and Apollo was born. But so I write for Hmong representation and for diverse representation. And it's not only that I want Hmong readers to read my books and recognize themselves, but I also want non-Hmong readers to read the books and see that Hmong kids are just like me. All they want to do is have fun, and I don't want Hmong people aren't often represented in mainstream literature, but there is a stereotype about Hmong people that they're just a sad, struggling refugee. And so I wanted to show that a more well-rounded and balanced picture of Hmong people, which is that, yes, we are refugees, but we are so much more than that. And that's not all that we are. And I hope that my books will show that. My books do not focus or bring up anything about the war, or about the refugee status or anything, or trauma, anything like that. My books are just about the kids going camping, and going to a soccer celebration and just eating and just like having a good time. So I'm not sure, did I answer your question?
You answered it amazingly. Thank you so much for sharing. It is definitely part of my passion for being a bookseller, is to making sure that I am doing what I'm capable of, making sure kids can always see themselves in books. And I'm so thankful that publishing is finally recognizing that is a necessity, and that you've been able to share these stories and your voice, and especially just the everyday aspect of it as well, I think is so important. But thank you again to all of you for sharing not only your books at large, but your time this evening. We really appreciate being a part of all of this. As always, as I mentioned before, the books are available for sale at Print Bookstore. I'll drop that in a link one more time. So please, if you're able, order these books, learn more about these amazing characters, and enjoy those snippets of stories we got today, and support our amazing authors. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their night.
Could I ask for just a couple minutes to peek at the chat before we go, just so I can...
Totally, sure. Yeah, I'm gonna cut off the recording, but feel free to browse the chat.
Thank you.